Hello, and welcome to SG Squared. Steve Gladen, the global pastor of small groups from Saddleback Church, pulls from his over 25 years of experience to encourage and equip listeners like you to lead small group ministry. So let's listen and learn together.
Welcome to SG Squared. Steve Gladen on small groups. Derek here, your host, with the main man, the man whose very initials stand for small groups, the man who's a fine connoisseur of cheeses, Steve Gladen. Steve, how are you, my friend?
Doing well, my friend. Just celebrated my birthday, and our team gave me a charcuterie board that was fit for the king, the lamb, the table that the Lord is going to set in heaven. I tell you, it was just incredible. You can go on my Instagram or on Facebook and take a peek at it, but it's been a great time and feel a little bit older in that. So, and then you, my friend, I mean, I'm just celebrating a birthday, but where were you again?
You know, I just got back from the great land of Peru.
That's right, Monte Picchu, which I probably said very white and terrible and all
Yeah,
that.
and
But
speaking of delectable delicacies, so you're eating your cheese platter. I ate something in Peru that I think our special guest might know a little something about. Will Johnston, who's going to talk about, we're going to introduce in a little bit. But I ate something in Peru called cuy. Any idea what that is, Steve?
Kui is Kui Uyu and Gui. You tell me, brother.
Will, any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Peru myself, and so if I'm not mistaken, I think that's a little bit of some guinea pig there.
That's right, guinea pig. Did you like it?
You know, I never had it because I heard everything just kind of blends together, but maybe it'd be better in an air fryer. You know, I just don't really know.
You know
We're
what?
going to ask our audience not to take Will up on the offer of putting your little guinea pig from your children into the air fryer and experiment, because that's not what the show is. That's not what the show is all about. You know, we're all about helping people do something that's good for the kingdom, not something that's going to destroy the family when you do that. See, Will, a little brother could be listening to this going, I think I'll take my sister's guinea pig and check it out. But
Exactly.
Derek, did you actually have it?
I actually did. Now,
And
one thing you need to know about guinea pig in Peru,
I don't need to know much about it, but
these babies are fat and juicy. Like it's not like a little tiny guinea pig that we get at our pet store. These things are huge. And the surprising thing is they don't taste all that bad. The bad part is they basically roast these suckers whole, and it's hard to eat when it's looking at you.
oh man, now you're mentioning this. I think I remember my daughter when she was doing study abroad down in Chile, just enjoying a little bit of that, because I remember the picture when she said looking at you. I'll stick with the cheese and fine fruits board that I got, and you can stick to ooey gooey and have fun with that.
Sounds good.
Hey, let me jump in. As Derek alluded to, we got a great show for you called Leading Up and Leading Out. I think it's one of the most prevalent topics, because all of us are leading, and generally most of the people who are listening to this, we are leading from the second chair. There's all kinds of books out there called, leading from the second chair, leading when you're not in charge. But Will Johnston, who he's going to help us get to know him just a little bit better, is one of our pastors here at Saddleback. He was at a retreat with our connections pastors, or our small group pastors, and Will gave a talk similar to this. He's kind of expanded it a little bit. But Will, welcome to the show. Give us a little bit of your bio and why you are more than just the handsome face that's on the screen.
I don't know if I'm more. I think I am just the face, and maybe like average at best, but I appreciate that.
Well, Hannah thinks something a little different, which how long you been married and all those details.
Yeah, my amazing wife, Hannah, we've been married for 2.5 years now. 2.5 years.
She still loves you.
Steve got to see all of my good dance moves on the dance floor that day. But yeah, I've been at Saddleback. I've been a pastor here for 7 years now, and it's been just a gift in a few different roles, students, small groups, and now I have the privilege of leading one of our campuses here, and so get do a little bit of that. Little about me, I love baseball and I love fried chicken, and those 2 are pretty high up there on my scale. Yeah,
Fried guinea
I
pig?
think that covers all you really need to know.
No fried guinea pig?
I haven't tried it, but I can add it in. You throw a little KFC, 11 herbs and spices on there, and it might work.
Come on.
I've traveled with Will enough to know that when he's saying fried chicken, I think a couple of the words that are missing from that description is hot chicken.
Ooh, yep.
And he is a hot chicken brother. So any of my friends in Nashville, bring him out. But what Will is not talking to you or hasn't shared with you is Will started out in our student ministry, was our small group pastor, is now leading one of our campuses. Don't feel too bad for him because he's over in on the coastline leading one of our campuses, which is quite sick and all that. But one of the things I've loved about Will is that he has intuitively done a number of things in his leadership development that I've seen throughout the years, from when he was doing student ministries to when he was doing small group ministry, and now when he's a campus pastor. And I kind of want to unpack some of these things, because what he did naturally are, things that all of us have to do, because, we are leading. I'm in transition at Saddleback Church. We have a new lead pastor, and there's a lot of places where I've got to lead from a completely different chair than when I was with Rick. And so all these muscles. But Will, could you kind of unpack a little bit, kind of set the table for this conversation, and we'll kind of dive into some questions that we've got written down that we want to drill you with, and then you can kind of go from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Yeah. I think this is such a prevalent conversation because church is just so much about people. It's a
Yeah.
people job. And when we talk specifically small groups, like you said, we're usually second, third, fourth chair. And we don't know necessarily how do we function within the staff dynamics, the workplace culture. And I think this conversation, it's come up so much when I, originally gave this talk. It came up out of need of this people asking questions, people coming to me and saying, "Hey, I love this, I love that. How do we get there?" But what's so interesting is we typically, whatever culture we're in, we begin to unconsciously take in some cues from that culture. And at least
Mhm.
here, within the United States, we have some maybe unspoken, unseen cultures that we've taken cues from within the church and just kind of adopted in with us. And so I think that's really where it begins to kind of set the table. And so there are many things, probably things popping off in your mind right now, but I've worked at 3 different churches, and these are things that I've just seen, and when it being in conversations, like, okay, these are maybe 3 of the most prevalent ones that kinda help set the table of what really is underlying some of these challenges and some of these cultural reflections. And so, the first one is really, we kinda take on this escapism work culture. So there's kind of this working for the weekend. My life really starts when I'm outside of work. So what I'm doing here is kind of a second tier living. It's not really main to who I am. The second that's
Okay.
prevalent is individualistic results. And so my personal results are the utmost sign of success. So whatever my ministry is doing, whatever I'm doing, if it's doing good, then I'm good. I don't need to check any other boxes. And that third one is passive responsibility, which is so prevalent. I mean, if you listen to any leadership podcast, so prevalent within the
Mhm.
secular work culture right now. And it's this thought of, I'm just going to take care of what I need to take care of. So this is my job description. This is it. Um, Everything outside of that is just not us. And so kind of the buck never stops with me. We say things like, "Oh, well, they don't pay me enough for that," or that's not really what
Mhm.
I do. That's not my niche of the world. And so we kind of have these three cultural narratives that have unconsciously slipped into our church work cultures. And many times, I mean, go for it. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, I love what you're talking about there is, when you're talking about the passive, just a little clarification point, would that be not looking at the whole church piece of it? Or is that, are you going a little bit of a different route?
I think it's both. I think it's not understanding the full church, and I'll explain it in a little bit here of,
Okay.
I think, a poor theology of the body of Christ, but I think it's also really just saying, hey, I'm just going to, it almost bleeds out of that second piece, which I was talking about, the individualistic results,
Mhm.
is that we just want to do our thing, check our box, get out. And so it doesn't then, we don't really celebrate sometimes the wins of other people in ministry. We don't celebrate the kids' ministry wins as our wins. We don't celebrate,
Mhm.
when we have a huge event and that goes on, if we have an experienced pastor, someone who's put so much time into that, we don't take those wins as our own and celebrate. It's all very siloed when it comes to some of the ways we think and value those specific ministries and our own ministry as well.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. So to think then, okay, if these are three prevalent ideologies that we've really unconsciously subscribed to, we can really see biblically like these don't really match up with us. These aren't biblical values that we should be leaning into. I mean, just quickly we can think through, okay, that first one of escapism. I mean, God wants our life to fully reflect him and flow together. So I
Yeah.
mean, this even goes back to kind of youth ministry conversations, what we push students on of that. Yeah, every piece of your life should be reflective of Jesus. It should all be one thing. It's not all these facets that are separate, but everything should be flowing together.
Mhm.
And then when we think of individualistic results, is we know in the church we don't measure success maybe sometimes well. It can be hard to really measure success in the spiritual side of things. But we know that as the body of Christ, that's what we should be pursuing is the body of Christ flourishing together, people meeting Jesus, spiritual maturity,
Mhm.
serving others. And if my niche ministry or idea uh, kind of takes the cake on it, then we've kind of missed it. We've kind of missed what our main goal is. And then lastly, going further into that in the body of Christ is we know we have responsibility to each other. So to see is, oh, I'm just on my own. I don't really need to have responsibility for others. I mean, we can go back and into Genesis and see, oh, it almost sounds like we're not our brother's keeper in that. And those things just all kind of work together and say, well, this isn't really who we are in Jesus. This isn't really who we are called to be as the church. And while the church in some ways, we have it as a workplace, we still need to bleed out as the culture of the church and the culture of the kingdom and not the opposite so. And you might be thinking, okay, how I see that. I don't know how that plays out. And
Mhm.
I think there's some pretty quick symptoms because I think when these things come in, we see staff culture challenges and staff culture just decaying within our
Mhm.
churches, and they look similar to when we go into our secular workplaces. And so, some of those things that I think uh, we see are, you know, we don't realize that, okay, we're dealing with people. Church stuff is
Yeah,
all about people,
that's for sure.
and we're small groups people, but we don't necessarily think of our staff as a small group. And in
Yeah.
many ways, it's maybe our most important small group that we end up spending time with. We might be spending 20, 30, 40 hours a week with these people. And so this is our most prevalent small group, but it's nothing new that to think about, okay, there is decaying culture. I mean, we can look in scripture and we don't have to look too far to see. I mean, Paul and Barnabas even reached a point where like, yeah, I'm good. I don't think we really need to hang out anymore. I think we can work separately. Yeah. Um, and so we have these decaying cultures. We can say we see the symptoms of it, but then we think, okay, but we all would probably also agree we want to enjoy our workplace. We want
Yeah.
to enjoy the people we work with, but that necessarily is those two things we can say they're both real. We see the symptoms, we see this is it, and we also see this is maybe something, okay, we all want to enjoy working here, but we might not. And so we kind of run into a little bit of a collision when those two come together.
Mhm. Do you think, Will, this is the same pre-COVID as post-COVID, or do you think there's a little bit more erosion
Mhm.
happening in the cultures? Because especially as people are working remotely in the workplace, and even in the church, there's a lot more working remotely, and there can be that natural decay that can actually, what you're talking about, really hurt us when we're trying to, lead up and even lead out with our staff.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. And I can only speak about it anecdotally. I actually have these conversations with pastors a lot from other churches, different denominations, and I think the symptoms were still the same pre-pandemic, kind of with most most things we're dealing with most challenges. But I do think, yeah, the more time we spend apart from each other, I think typically the less grace we offer each other. We
Yeah.
make assumptions when we don't see the behind the scenes of people, when we're not with people. And so we begin to maybe jump to conclusions, um, start maybe judging people's intentions instead of knowing their actions. And so I think there are more challenges now that we're maybe just a little more aware of because of maybe some of the disconnect of time we're spending with people.
Yeah, no doubt. Proximity tends to breed empathy.
Hmm.
And if we're scattered, we're working separate and things like that, and the natural things you talked about. Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Will, I really like your just the point you make on individualistic results, and that my personal results are the utmost sign of success, in the secular world, but that does so bleed over into ministry. And I like the point you make that we often don't know how to measure success in the church well. But the goal is for the church, the body of Christ, to flourish. And whether that's small groups, I have X amount of groups, and so we think, oh, we've hit the pinnacle and we're healthy, when maybe what's happening in the groups is not healthy, right? Or because our church has reached this number of people, um, you know, externally that can be cool and exciting and on social
Mhm.
media, but like you're saying, the staff cannot even be unified. So I love these points you're hitting on.
Mhm.
Keep it going.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I think kind of the next question it comes to is then we begin to point fingers. Like we'll agree on that this is an issue. We'll agree we want to enjoy where we work. But then
Mhm.
we say, okay, whose fault is it? And I typically see we first kind of point to our senior leader, which I totally understand. It's like we see them as this headpiece there, and we typically just jump quickly and we take ourselves out of the equation of it. But I have found that if we in our small groups role or whatever other role we have in a church, if we're the person that takes ourselves out of it, then we're probably 50% of the problem. If we're just sitting back waiting,
Mhm.
complaining about what other people are not doing, then we're kind of part of the problem. And
Yeah.
I can think of similar phrasings that people use of, oh well, my lead pastor, they just need to set the tone. Or, oh man, if the denomination just did this, then fill in the blank. Or, oh man, if the board of directors, if the deacons, if they had this conversation, then things would be different. And so we think of of certain people in authority as the ones who have the sole responsibility with staff dynamics, with our workplace, instead of maybe seeing ourselves as an equal portion. So instead of seeing it as maybe a pie, that we're all an equal part of the pie. And well, if the pie don't taste good, hey man, we are one of those slices that don't taste good as well. And so we we have to think of ourselves in it and not necessarily as ones who are receiving it. And I think
Will,
that's where part of that disconnect is.
yeah, you bring up a great point, and I know we want to get to some of the practical pieces, but I think I can remember young in my ministry career, how whether when I was in student ministry or in singles ministry or even couples ministry, there was those points where I would think to myself, well, if the church was growing, if the weekend was growing,
Mhm.
then I could do my job a whole lot better. Versus
Mhm.
thinking, okay, if the weekend is hurting, how can I come along and be a part of that solution, and
Exactly.
and be seen as a friend, not a foe to the senior pastor, or if nothing else, an anchor, um, that's doing nothing but sitting around waiting to be used, and so on the ship. So I think you bring up a good point, because I think when you're not in the first chair, it's very easy for you to armchair quarterback or critique, or not jump into the fray and say, how do I help this, whether or not it's in my job description. So Now, when you're moving away, let's say all of our listeners, which I know they are, they're like going, I would never cast blame like Steve did when he was younger with that. But so what would be some steps to go towards that? How would you course correct maybe some things when you're thinking about, okay, is this a course correct on leading up, a course correct on leading out? How would you navigate that?
That's great. And I think I'm going to set some crawl, walk, and run steps for us, because we're all at different
We
points.
love that at Saddleback.
We do love that. And I think we're all just at different points with this. And I think everything I'm going to present is pretty standard. Like, nothing's necessarily novel about it, but I think it just takes a lot of intentionality. I think we can, when we're not doing it, like, we can say, oh yeah, this is easy. And the truth is, it is easy, but is it a habit? Are these things bleeding in to our everyday church life? And typically, and I'll speak for myself, typically it's no. I can go through this list myself, and this is a checklist for myself. And I can say weekly, oh, this isn't how I've lived. And so it's making it a habit, because we can say it's easy and we can do it one off. But if we don't make it a habit, then nothing is realistically going to change. So I think it really starts with thinking about what do you want your work culture to be? And then what steps are you going to take to get there? It's basic goal setting. But many of us want someone else to, like I said earlier, set the tone. And so then we don't even think about, we'll complain about it, but we don't necessarily think about what's the work culture, what's the church culture we want to create here. We let that be separate, when really we need to start with that of, where do we want this to be? What do I want it to be when I step in at 9 a.m. or Sunday morning at 7 a.m.? What do I want it to feel like? And what are the steps that I need to take to get there? So I'll give some helpful pieces here of maybe some crawl steps. And this for me started out just as a checklist of, okay, if I'm going to be intentional in my community here, in my staff, this is a checklist that I feel like we need to be going through every other week, just to say, okay, am I doing these things? I remember in a leadership class in Bible school, we talked through so many leadership principles that were basic. And then we had to follow up within our ministry. Are we doing those things? And we all came back and it was like, with 10% efficiency, are we doing those things?
Wow.
And so this is a checklist I think is helpful to come back to every other week. And so in the crawl steps, I just have a lot of questions. So if you're thinking, man, I just really need to get started with this, I just need to try something, I think these are all questions that are helpful. So the first one is, how can I make this more fun, memorable, or intentional? And that's just whatever you're doing, whether you're in a staff meeting, whether you're at lunch with your staff, whether you're in a hard conversation. How do you make it more intentional? How do you make it more memorable? Are you just allowing things to happen, or are you being proactive in those conversations, in your staff meetings, in your conversations? The second is, how much time am I spending with each staff member? And this is twofold. This is, am I not spending enough time with a certain staff member, or am I spending too much with another staff member? We know this. We all gravitate towards certain people. We're always going to have our staff buddy, but are we spending adequate time with each staff member? Are we saying, well, okay, I don't really connect with this person. Well, do you not connect with that person because of realistic things, or is it just because you haven't spent time with them? That's a true thing. How do we equally share time with people? The third one is, when was the last time I ate a meal with each staff member in a setting of 4 or less? And so I say 4 or less is like, is it intimate? Can you have real conversation there? And some of us, our staffs, I've worked on a church where the staff was less than 4. And so you can have all those intimate conversations, but as they continue to grow, as your staff continues to grow, you need to be intentional, thinking, okay, just because it grows, we can't keep doing the same things and expecting the same intentionality and output from it. So making changes to adapt to that. Number 4 is, when was the last time I talked with them about their family? This just shows deeper care. We can be so tied to tasks and responsibilities in ministry that we forget about the personhood. We forget about the person that we're dealing with. And so we separate ourselves. So then it becomes, if it's just about tasks and responsibilities, if they are not doing their task, if they're not doing what's helpful for me, then our relationship is not good together. But if it's
Mm,
more than that, if it's more about their family, if it's more about who they are as a person, then those things are actually secondary. We care about them as a person first. And when we
yeah.
think about then judging their intentions, we know their intentions. We know who they are.
I remember when we were taking Erica to college. This is 7, 8 years ago. And I remember Rick, I forget if he sent me a text or an email, and he just said, "Hey, I know you're jumping on a plane. You and your family, you're going to go as a family of 4, dropping your daughter off. You're going to come home with 3." He goes, "I know it's going to be the toughest day of your life. And I just want to let you know I'm praying for you. Kay and I are praying for you." And it literally brought me to tears, because I'm like going, oh my goodness, it's just, not out of the blue, but it was just one of those things where, you know, he was engaging me where my heart was at. So I love that. I interrupted you, but
Oh,
keep
no, that's
pressing.
a
These
that's a
are
fantastic point.
gold. These are gold. These are only crawl steps. I know we got some walk and runs to come to.
Yeah. So the next crawl step is, how much time am I spending in communal spaces or around other staff? This, no matter what size of church you're at, can
Mm,
be an issue. If you're just a closed door mentality of, hey, you show up, you get your stuff done, it happens behind a closed door,
yeah.
you're making choices that have consequences that come with that. I know for myself, I try to have a 50-50 mentality with myself,
Yeah.
because I know, and we all know, if we're in a communal space, we probably get a little less done. We're probably not as productive as we are maybe when we're on our own. But there's something that communicates when we're working with each other. And there's something also that spending time with people breeds collaborality. And that's not something that necessarily comes quickly or easy. And so
Did you
spending
just say
time in those communities,
collaborality?
I made that word up. I realized it as I said it, And yeah, you'll find it in a dictionary soon. Just buy the
I, I, I
2023 version, it'll be there.
I
Yeah.
love it. Collaborality.
Breeds a little
Hashtag that.
collaboration, for all of the old people out there who don't have the newer dictionaries there.
Ouch. Ouch.
I didn't say you, Steve. You took that on yourself. You put yourself in front
Okay.
of
Keep going with how we're building this community.
that. Next is, when was the last time I followed up on something we talked about recently? So if someone
Mm,
shared something with you,
That's so
whether it was a
good.
prayer request, whether it was something going on in their life, when was the last time you checked in? And it can be something light. I know someone I worked with is a huge Penguins fan, and I don't like hockey at all. But when they were in the playoffs, I'm texting, "Oh man, did you see this? I can't believe that play. That's nuts. That's crazy." And those are just little things that go a long way with people. The next is, what does each staff member want from our relationship? So, what are expectations that they want? Because you'll have people on
mm,
staff that are extreme extroverts, and if they could have a game night with you 7 nights of the week, they will be there ready to go. And there's other people who, hey, all they want from you is maybe just a weekly check in and dropping off a coffee at their desk. And knowing those expectations
mm,
helps you spend the time that actually needs to happen for that relationship to grow. And then the last one, which honestly could be the first one, is, when was the last time I encouraged each staff member? When was the
mm.
last time I encouraged each staff member to their face?
Yeah.
And I think, I know for myself, I can get caught on that one and say, "Oh, it's been some time. It's been some time." So there's
Dude,
some crawl steps, and you might
this,
say,
this list is gold. I mean, just on the crawl steps, I'm like going, dude. By the way, people may be thinking, you may be listening to this podcast and you're listening to, leading up and leading out with our buddy Will Johnston, and you're like you're listening, going, oh, what are all those? Hey, in the show notes, we are gonna capture everything that Will has been dropping on us, and we'll get these to you. So if you're feeling lost in the world, don't worry. In the show notes, you're going to have it all itemized for you the best we can. We will edit out, the air fryer on the hamsters and the gerbils and all that, but we'll get you the good stuff in the show notes so you can keep going with that. So you gave us some great crawl steps. I mean, seriously, Will, awesome crawl steps. Go to the walk and the run.
yeah, and we'll walk and run through these ones too. And if you're saying these are easy, okay, how do we then step up the ante?
Yeah.
With walk steps, I think a good walk step is for you to have an onboarding strategy for new staff. So we think of onboarding maybe being, if we're a larger church, an HR thing, or maybe being a senior lead pastor piece.
Yeah.
But as staff who are just sitting around a table equally, how do we have an onboarding strategy?
Yeah.
So are we taking them out to lunch, or bringing in a quick lunch for them that we can just sit and chat? For me, my onboarding strategy is spending time with that person once a week for just, hey, maybe going and sitting in their office, maybe taking them out. And then the second thing is a weekly check-in on if they have questions. Every church culture is different. So they can be in ministry for 40 years, come to a new staff, and it's really starting over and figuring things out. And so it's 2 weekly check-ins, one for relational connection and one for work connection. Hey, can I help you with anything? There are any acronyms we use that you just have no idea what we're talking about? All of those pieces that sometimes we just don't think about. And then staff are sitting there for a year and being like, man, they have been talking about this every staff meeting for a year, and I'm just afraid to ask. We can take care of those things, being somebody around the table and making that initiation ourselves. So we have to have an onboarding strategy. Secondly, is just thinking about how do we engage them on a deeper level? So outside of an onboarding, just a normal staff member, inviting them and their spouse over for a food or game night. I know I briefly talked about earlier, some people would want this every night, but maybe even just quarterly, thinking, how am I engaging their family? How am I engaging their family outside of a 9 to 5 workday? The next is, this is a fun one, know everyone's favorite drink. So when you go to a restaurant, I don't know about you, but I find that this splits. You get into a restaurant, people need to wash their hands. They're checking in on their kids. Do they need to pick up their kids because they're in detention? And if you know everyone's drink and can order for them, you think, oh, that sounds kind of, I don't know, that's a random one. But it goes a long way with people because it shows that they're known on a deeper level. It shows, okay, yeah, you know them. You've spent time with them. You know their ministry. If you know something so finite with them, then you might know some of the bigger things as well.
I know Derek's drink is a Shirley Temple, so I've got that down pat.
Oh, I love that.
I love that. That's what I'd call a pro tip right there. Know their drinks. Come on. I mean, this stuff sounds so simple on ways, but it's so huge, right? It's so human. It's so personal. And I mean, I know we've all worked for several churches by now in our lives, and it's crazy how, I mean, I look back on some of the churches I was at, had I practiced some of this, and then, the lead pastor practiced some of this, I might have lasted a lot longer.
So true.
Yeah. And I think that's just the case of, we can take some of the initiative to help ourselves, some of the burden that we're carrying, these simple things take off. And so when we think about some of these bigger challenges that are weighing on us, some of these set the table to actually take apart some of those deeper challenges before they ever start, before they ever get going. Some of those other walk steps, which I think are helpful to break those down even more, is knowing their birthdays and their family members' birthdays. Again, an easy thing, but as much as I love you, Steve, I don't know your exact birthday, but it's in my calendar. I have your birthday in my calendar. And so, hey, this last week you said it was your birthday, and 11 a.m., I get a reminder. It's Steve's birthday, and I shoot you a text. And though I have every staff member in my calendar, I have every staff member's spouse, and I also have now every staff member's kids' birthday in my calendar. So I can just follow up with them, send a nice little text to say, hey, have a great birthday. And those little things go a long, long way.
Hey, your present didn't come yet, so just if you have the tracking number, if you can flip that and check it up on it.
Yeah, I sent it carrier pigeon, and he only had one leg, so I don't know if he'll make it there on time.
Okay,
but by next year, it'll be there. It'll be there.
And get your money back.
Exactly. That goes to my next one, which is actually individualized birthday gifts. And I know you're thinking, hey, I make as much as a pastor. I don't have enough for individualized birthday gifts. But I will tell you, over my 12 years in ministry, the gift that's meant the most to me, and you're going to laugh at this, is I got this year for my birthday from a staff member, one of those pop figurines of the Hamburglar. And you think that is so random, and it was, and it probably cost him $5. But another staff member, we've got some inside jokes about McDonald's. They're dumb. They're probably not funny to any other person. But to me, that he knew me so well that he was going to buy me something that was significant to our friendship. It didn't have to cost a lot. But again, it was personalized. It was individualized. And that thing is sitting on my desk, and my wife hates that it's sitting on my desk, but that to me means something. And we can all do that. We can spend $3-4 on something that means something to someone besides getting a gift card for $25. We don't need to be thinking about those things. We can just think of something that's individualized for someone that might mean something more to them.
And just so you guys are knowing, as Will's blowing through these lists and everything like that, he preaches, he lives what he's talking about, and he buys what he sells. I know that he had a connection with my son who he knew loved hot sauces, and he, not an expensive thing, but got him, a 4-set little bottle of hot sauces that he loved, and he just knew it was Pastor Will with that. So it's these things. So keep going, man. I just gotta jump in on everything, but
thanks, man. And I hope you sweated with those hot sauces with him. I hope you.
So that was the motivation.
Exactly. Well, the last walk step I have is show up to something that matters to them, whether that's a kid's sports game or play, whether it's something that they do, even if it's just a slow pitch softball league, whatever matters to that staff member, just make an attempt to show up and just be present. Doesn't cost anything, won't take too much of your time, but just show up to something that matters.
And so often in student ministry, this is such common stuff. I mean, I can't tell you how many high school games I went to, how many junior high games I went to, how many recitals I went to as a student pastor. But, somehow as we drift into adult world, we forget that the same principles are so powerful. So, Okay, what do you got for us on the run? You've gone through 7, 8 or so crawl, 6 or so walk. And as we bleed into the run steps, man, keep going.
Yeah, the run steps, I think we need to think about what we're thinking about. And I read this really interesting study about long-lasting relationships and marriages. And they talked about that unique joint experiences were one of the great underlying contributors to long-lasting marriages. And I thought that was so interesting, and I began to apply it to my ministry and how I connected with people. Is how can I then create unique joint experiences with my staff, with people that are sitting across from me at a desk? And I think this is where things can go from really good to great. And they're not actually hard. So 2 things that I'll just throw out here that I've done that are really, really helpful is finding grand openings in your area. These are just, when I talk about unique joint experiences, these are just one-offs that maybe are a little bit different. To give some perspective, this is kind of like when a team goes on a missions trip and they didn't know each other beforehand, but they come back and they are tight. I mean, they will just tell everybody every story, play by play, that you do not want to hear, but it's meant something to them, that they've lived this unique joint experience. So how do we then create that in our everyday ministry when we're grinding 9 to 5, when we're grinding all this extra time together in ministry? So one of those is grand openings. There are so many in different communities where it's just a grand opening. You come for free, and they are usually pretty comical because most places aren't prepared for a grand opening. And so we started doing this as a staff. I would just find grand openings. We would go, and these were just unique joint experiences. And then on the ministry side is, where can you look for unique community events where you as a staff can engage in the community? So you're really working hard at something, but it's something significant that you guys get to join in together in. So those are the 2 easy run steps. But I think it really starts with, how do you share more unique joint experiences with your staff?
Will, what would could you give a couple examples of what a community event might be?
Yeah. I think it's just something that you don't have to put on. So something that you get to join in with. So this can be even as an outreach event of, hey, reaching out to, whether it's the city, Parks and Rec department, they're just putting something on for the community. I know this last year, the city I was working in, they put on as just an Easter event the week before Easter. And we said, hey, can we just come along suit and just help you with whatever you're doing? It was a great outreach for us to connect with families in the community. But it's just a wild time when you are actually not in control of the event. And there was just so many stories that came out for that. And we just got a bond as a staff for that time together.
So would that include maybe even baseball games or things like that? Anything?
Oh,
related?
sure. Yeah, it can be
Yeah.
some fun stuff too, go to a minor league baseball game, go to something that's fun together, spend time that's just unique with people. That's just not something you do every day.
Yeah, no, it's
Mm.
great. So, Wills, we've been talking about leading up and leading out, and you talked about a lot of good foundational things that you can do, the crawl, walk, run. I love your phrase, it's easy, but is it a habit? And I just want to encourage listeners, go into the show notes, go through these crawl, walk, runs and listen to them. But we're not done yet. But, the other thing I would say is, Will and I and Derek have journeyed down this road of doing these things. It's going to take time. And when you look at this list, you're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I microwave it? And you just can't. And so that's why this is so important. The foundational piece, this is so important because what it does is it sets up the next thing that we're going to talk about. And Will, we know that the senior leader is probably one of the biggest juggernauts that, people who are small groups types that are trying to listen to this and go, okay, I'll put in these crawl, walk, runs in play. But would you say as how is, because we know trust drives everything. What would be some nuggets that maybe as we're trying to build those bridges, and obviously the crawl, walk, runs that you gave right here, but how would you unpack that part of it as you're going to that next level of really working with the senior leader?
That's really good. This kind of gets into that leading up principle. We've talked about leading
Yep.
out, but this gets to that leading up principle. And typically when we approach this, we come with the idea of, okay, our senior leader in our eyes isn't doing something correctly, or our senior leader isn't taking our ideas.
Yeah.
And so then we want A, B, and C to happen.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't actually start with wanting to build trust in relationship. It starts with wanting something on the other end of it. And so our senior leader becomes a means to an end. So I think building trust, it really just needs to begin with right intentions. Instead of wanting to connect with them because we want something, we need to start with the right intentions, because that's the difference between leading up and sucking up. Those are those two things that if it's with another intention, this is actually just sucking up. And we've been around. We know we can see those things happen.
Derek, that's got to be the title of the show now. It's not leading up and leading out. It's leading. What'd you say? Leading.
I said the difference between leading up and sucking up. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go, baby.
Leading up versus sucking up.
There we go. I think it's, we got to get a little, it's going to be great. That'll drive it through. Anyways,
Exactly.
I digress very quickly, as you can see on the show. You'll never come back, Will, but we want to have you back. Keep going.
I'm used to you by now, Steve. I'm used to you by now. So
that's true.
So really, it just can't be a ploy. Building trust cannot be a ploy. It has to really start with enjoying and living with the people that God has placed in your life. Because really, it's not going to be successful in the long term if it really is about sucking up. If it's about getting something, if it's not done with the right heart, probably the right action is not going to come out, and then not the right result is going to follow with it. So I really think trust with a senior leader, it starts with just the basics of being a good friend. And you might say that is obvious, but exactly, it's obvious. And many times, I know I haven't done it. Many times I've seen other people when they come to me and say, hey, I'm having this, this, and this. How do I approach them about a serious conversation? So it starts with the end first, saying, oh, buddy, man, you got a lot of things to work through before you can get to that. You haven't even built friendship and trust with them. And so it's kind of this funny disconnect, though, because typically, I mean, if you're in ministry, people want to be close to the senior pastor. They want to be close to the lead pastor. But then yet when we get into a church role, and many small groups people, we might be the closest person to the senior pastor. We don't actually value that relational equity that maybe someone who's just an average church attender would. And so we begin to think of it more in work terms, which we've talked about earlier in a work culture, thinking of them as a boss instead of a ministry partner. And so we then just take ourselves a little bit out of the equation. We want them to take the initiative in our relationship. We want them to really take lead. And so we just sit back and wait for our senior leader, our lead person, to initiate. And then we become frustrated when our relationship with them doesn't look the ways that we want it to.
Yeah.
And so we need to make changes when it comes to that.
So good. So good. So, Will, you've set this up great for us. So, how do we go about getting practical now about making changes to make all this come about?
I think it really starts with a fancy Christian word, which I didn't make up, which is posture. It needs to start with the right posture. Where I gave very practical pieces for leading out, I think it comes with the right posture. And some of these are practical, but I just have about 5 or 6 questions, which I think are helpful to gauge your intentions. Are your intentions right? So the first one is, when's the last time you prayed for your lead pastor? Easy. It's Christian. We should say, oh yeah, we do it.
Yeah.
But do we? The next is, when was the last time you asked about their kids? This is similar to a crawl step I said with leading out. You got to care for their family. When was the last time you asked them out for dinner? I've heard people say, oh man, they never invite me over. They never have me out. Okay, well, when's the last time you did it? If you're not doing it, how can you expect them to do it either? When was the last time you asked if there's something you could take off their plate? So many times we're saying, okay, why can't they trust me with more? Well, how about we put it vice versa? If you see them struggling with something, saying, hey, can I take this off your plate for you? Can I run with this? And I will say 100,000,000% of the time, they will say yes. I don't know any lead pastor that doesn't want to push something off of their plate onto somebody else. And so when you
I can't do that
off,
when I take them to dinner.
Exactly.
We'll do it more on the work thing. Okay.
Yeah. But this is key of taking something off their plate. And I think similarly to that is, can you be the conscience for something on your church's campus, in your church work culture, that maybe they are not aware of, or maybe there's something they're not good at? I think that's where things can kind of make a shift of, I know in my previous role, there was an area where I knew my lead pastor, this wasn't his skill set. He was honest about it, but I was a little above average in that area. And so I said, hey, can I be the conscience for this at the campus? Can I just take things over on this and just ask good questions about it and follow up with it? And those are areas that, okay, you are asking for trust. It most of the time will be given, and then you get to prove yourself with it. The next is, when was the last time you talked with no agenda? I find that the larger your church staff becomes, the more the relationship between the senior leader and staff person becomes just about tasks and responsibilities.
Yeah.
And it's just, I have a second with them. I'm going to take it to ask about this, and this. Where we really need to start with, if I have a second with them, I'm going to check in on how they're doing. I'm going to check in and, hey, how's your marriage holding up? This seems like a hard season for you. Or, hey, I saw on Instagram your kid's in Little League right now. How's it going? I think when we think about, okay, I have a second with them, we should think of that first before having an agenda piece. And then the last thing to think about is, when was the last time you texted them about something happening in their life? And why I say text is, this is an outside of work time. This is a time that's on your own, and you're saying, hey, I'm going to take the initiative to ask you something about your life that's going on with you and check in. So these are all just kind of flipping the script of, if you're in a leadership role, I would ask my people this. But how can we flip it and put the responsibility on ourselves?
So, Will, you're talking about some great things from the last chunk of the episode to this one. On the leading out, and then as we're talking about the leading up. But what do you do? What if it's not all roses? Maybe this is the front end. What if there's snap? I know you never experienced this part with me, but let's suppose there's a hiccup, a problem, a fly in the ointment, something like that's going on, which maybe some people have out there. Maybe they're trying to. What would you? How would you take this a step deeper
Yeah.
into the conversation with the senior leader.
Yeah. So, how do we have these hard conversations with someone in a seat of power over us? I think is always a challenge. And, you might come through, hear these posturing questions I ask and think, okay, I'm just good to roll. And for me, I try to ask myself a few questions before I go into these conversations to
Okay.
make sure my intentions are pure. Because we typically want to express concern, frustration, or challenges, but those are all emotions that can express themselves in so many different ways. And they can be rooted in some deeper heart areas I think we need to be aware of before we just say, okay, I've got a good relationship with them. I'm just going to jump in. And so, questions I think of are one I talked about earlier is when was the last time I encouraged them? If I can't think about the last time I've encouraged them, I probably shouldn't be having a hard conversation with them. My intentions probably aren't right. The second is I ask, are my emotions pure, or am I mad because they shot down my idea? They've been spending more time with another staff member besides me. Or there's something going on at home within my life, and I actually don't have a healthy outlet for it. So I'm finding this to let it out. And then the last one is, am I okay being wrong? When we bring something to a person, specifically a lead pastor, someone in authority over us, there is a good possibility that our vision isn't whole with this, that we are not seeing everything in the picture. So are we okay if he or she doesn't agree with it, or if actually our perspective is not full and is actually incorrect because of it? And so when
But
we can start there, we can start to make changes.
so we'll take it another step though, because I mean, this looks great in the conversation, but there is the reality too that when people are trying to engage with their lead person, there is a little bit of fear and trepidation,
Yeah.
because they are in power, they are in the seat ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
And fear is a common emotion. The enemy uses that on every place it can. How would you address that aspect of it? I mean, I love where you're going with this,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also just, if they can't overcome the emotional piece, they'll never get to these pieces.
Yeah. I think that's a really honest question. And I do know in ministry there are leaders who are unhealthy. There are leaders who things just don't things aren't in the places they need to be. But I'm a very positive guy, so I would venture to say that most of the people leading us, they want the betterness of the church. They want our church to grow, to succeed, to be healthy. And if we begin with that and believing that if that is their goal and what we're bringing to them plays into that goal, we don't have to approach it with fear. I think there's good ways to approach it when it comes to practical pieces, of our tone, the time we spend with them, when we have these conversations. But if it's playing into the overall goal of the church, I know now sitting in a lead role currently, I would value if there's something that's going on that needs to be changed, bring it to me. If I said something that either hurt somebody, offended someone, man, bring it to me and I would love to talk through that. And so when it starts with that, if it starts with saying, I care for the betterment of the church, so I am bringing this up, that is where I think the fear can take a back seat and we can view this as a team going forward in the future.
Well, we've been talking with Will Johnston, one of my favorite pastors on Saddleback staff. Doing some great things. We'll get some final words that we may have missed from you on that. I also have a companion podcast that goes with this that'll be in the show notes. You can look on that on how to lead up with your senior leader. And as we've been talking about leading up and leading out, which I like better, leading up and not sucking up. That'll be the subtitle to it. Will, do you have any last thoughts before Derek brings us home and wraps it up?
Yeah, I would just say leading up and leading out. It's not about getting your way, like we were just talking about. It's not about making you rise to the top. It's about caring for your church. It's about caring for your staff, your senior leader, having their back. And if you commit to just those things, your church will be a better place.
Outstanding.
So good. Will, you should sleep well tonight knowing that Steve Gladen just said you are one of his favorite Saddleback pastors.
Because I've never said that before.
One of many, you know.
Yeah. No, we have way too much fun, which is why we had to jump you on here. And Will, the gold you brought, and again, I just want to remind our listeners, all the lists that he threw out, we are going to get them into the show notes. They'll be there for you to go from, because there's actually some stinking gold on this, and so happy for that. So Will, love what you brought.
Well, thanks for having me, and man, for all those listeners, praying for your churches, praying for your staff health, because I know how much that matters.
Yeah, Will, great job. Thank you so much for joining us today and for all the time you put into these notes. Like Steve said, absolute gold. Everybody listening, go to the show notes, download this list Will created, print it, put it on your fridge, tape it to your forehead, and and you'll have a healthier church culture because of it. Well, we also want to thank everybody listening. Thank you again for spending part of your day with us and for tuning in to SG Squared. And our prayer is that this episode encouraged you and empowers you to lead healthier, better small groups in your local church. So until next time, goodbye.
See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And to dive in deeper, get more resources, or join the Small Group Network, just head over to smallgroupnetwork.com.